Hello, everyone. Just want to say thank you to the organizing committee for inviting me here. It's one of the few international people here, and maybe one of the few youngish people on the panel. So I just want to say that both of those things are very important to a forum like this. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm also very happy and honored to study this line of work, to look at anything in the Arctic. And Arctic coastal dynamics is one area, one field where it actually means a lot to a lot of people. And Senator Murkowski said, who's listening? And that's one thing that struck me. Who's listening? Well, the Arctic indigenous peoples are listening, and they've always been listening. And so when we go up there, and I've been up there a lot of times, and for many, many months at a time, living on the land, living with these people, and the stories and the traditional knowledge is part of the science, and I think we need to incorporate that, all of us, into the work we do and to the message that we deliver back to the policymakers. I just wanted to say that because that struck me. So yes, today coastal zone impacts. So let's start with a regional picture. This is the entire Arctic. And really, when we talk coastal impacts, we're really focusing on the areas where we see the most change. And the most change are from the Laptev Sea, the East Siberian Sea, and the Beaufort Sea. Why are these areas exhibiting the most change? We've heard about it a lot today. Permafrost is the main answer. So in general, our Arctic coastlines are retreating around 0.5 meters a year. So some of you who live on the coastline, maybe that's not that much. But if you look at the Beaufort Sea and the Laptev Sea and the East Siberian Sea, they're retreating on average of 1.5 to 2 meters, and that's 4 times greater than an area, maybe further down south that is seeing coastal erosion. So some of these, excuse the metrics, sorry.
We got
it? Yeah. So, it's just, some of these extreme rates are 8 meters a year with 15 meters of loss in just one storm. So again, issues facing the Arctic. What's happening right now? What's happening right now in the Arctic? I kind of alluded to what's happening over the long term, but right now we're actually seeing an acceleration. So there are a number of papers that focus on the Alaska coast that said the coastal erosion rate has actually doubled in the last 10 years. Our research is saying the exact same thing. So, and I guess we get into the details of it all. We see that it actually, this focuses on change. This talk is focused on change. But there's a lot of the Arctic, the low-lying deltas, the huge sand dunes, that aren't changing as fast as these huge ice-rich permafrost cliffs. But if we focus on the areas of change, then you see the pictures down below. These are the areas. And so the graph here, if we look at the comparison between 1950 and 1972 to the last 13 years, we see it also has doubled. So there's 2 factors here when you look at Arctic coastal dynamics. One is obviously the melting. We've talked a lot about the melting, right? The permafrost is melting. And we've also talked a lot about waves and the open water and the lack of sea ice. So these are the 2 main factors that are sort of driving coastal erosion in the Arctic. I'm going to focus on this one area, Pelly Island. Pelly Island is one of the most extreme examples. It's lost 1.5 kilometers since 1950 of its coastal front. And I mean, that has a lot of implications. One not being, there aren't any communities or anything. There's no infrastructure on Pelly Island. Actually, there's a Environment Canada weather station, but that's further back. But an implication is the sheer amount of volume of sediment being put into the ocean at one time. Or what about we heard a little bit about today about the 200-mile economic zone. Well, don't tell anybody, but it's actually shifted inland by a kilometer and a half at this point. So, and so I mentioned, that we have permafrost, we have waves, but you can see my hand here holding the ice. There's also pure ice in these cliffs. And It's so pure you can put it in a drink if you happen to have it out there with you. So we have ice dominating this story on the cliff, but really the story is the ice in the sea, right? Or the lack of ice in the sea, and it's the open water that creates more storms and more storminess that is continually hitting the coastline. So to kind of wrap up the current situation in the Arctic before we kind of take a glimpse of what this might mean for us down south. Temperatures are warming, sea state is increasing, and so these climate change things are happening, and also at the same time we see coastal change. So what are these emerging issues beyond the Arctic in terms of the coastal zone? So I'm going to look at a few things: health and well-being, security and social economics, species habitat, industrial development, and this is a good clue or a good foreshadowing of what's to come, possible. So health and well-being, again, a lot of this was, I'm quite happy to be going later on the day because a lot of this is review for you guys. This is great. So we have, coastal erosion, a huge, all this volume of sediment being eroded into the ocean. Obviously, we're going to see more dissolved organic carbon. We're going to see the release of trapped methane and the influx of fresh water. And one of the talks this morning focused on the origin of this organic carbon, where it sort of comes from the time in our history pre-glaciation when we had lots of rich flora and fauna in the Arctic, and it's exactly the case along the coastline as well. So, it's quite organic carbon rich, and it's old carbon that has obviously been decayed. So there's a number of implications to this. Whether it's marine food web, global carbon cycle. Now, all of these things here, they have implications to sea level rise. And we didn't talk a lot about sea level rise today, and I think you probably addressed that in other forums. But sea level rise obviously is a major contributor to coastal erosion, whether it's in the Arctic or anywhere else. Let's look at security and social economics. So sovereignty in the north. Again, a major concern for all of the countries that are on the Arctic Ocean. And well, why would coastal erosion affect sovereignty? Well, it affects sovereignty because the need for the coast for things like infrastructure, for sort of land-based camps and things like that. And then the loss of way of life, so that indigenous subsistence culture. And I think that's important because these people, they relied on the land and the sea and the interaction between the two for thousands of years. And if this changes, well, it not only changes the way they have to live, but in a way, it changes the sort of culture and the historical significance of how they've sort of used their land and how we perceive that they're using the land and ocean. And then this one's possibly near and dear to the Canadian heart, but there's a big endeavor over the last few years to look for the Franklin ships. So, any of the historians in the room, these monuments, these things that were put in place hundreds of years ago that really documents the voyage of discovery or the discovery of the Arctic or the discovery of North America. These things are disappearing as well. So industrial development, and oil and gas has been mentioned a lot today, and another industrial development in Canada at least is mining. And these are mining and oil and gas are absolutely important, to economy and whether it's in the Arctic or for the whole country for that matter. And these industries need shore-based infrastructure. They need safe harbors and ports, and they really rely on the transportation of goods. So, so the way that the coastline is continually moving, or at least sort of unknowingly moving. We need more information so we can monitor and we can plan for areas where these safe harbors and ports are going to be implemented in the future. And a great example of this. So in 1983, you can see that McKinley Bay was, so the Canadian Beaufort Sea was quite active in exploration of oil and gas. So they stored a lot of the equipment they overwintered in McKinley Bay in 1983, and then there was a moratorium on drilling. Then it opened up again, and now oil companies are seeking to go back to the Beaufort, and they need to kind of follow the same model where they hide the ships in the winter. And McKinley Bay is no longer a viable source because the coastal erosion is so great that it actually filled in the bay to a point where if the industry wants to go back, they have to dredge their way in. So loss of critical habitat. One great example is the Kendall Island Bird Sanctuary, and that's right in the Mackenzie Delta. It's a low-lying part of the Beaufort, so it's not really fronted by cliffs, but it's still eroding at a moderate pace. This area is housed over 60,000 shorebirds, and it's, so some of these birds migrate all the way down to Texas. So that has an influence on how the rest of the country sees this part. And then lastly, I said I'm going to talk a little about what's to come. Well, close to my house in Nova Scotia, we have the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and the Gulf of St. Lawrence is a seasonal ice cover. So what does seasonal ice cover in the winter give you? It gives you a blanket or a protectant against some of these winter storms. So erosion is less in the winter. Now, if you get rid of that ice, obviously erosion increases. But if you only get rid of that ice partially, and we now have pack ice, that is also a deterrent for the coast as well. Because then the pack ice will flow against the coast, scour the coast up, and then change the dynamics of the coast as well. The Great Lakes. So now we're talking people, right? This is where a large majority of the people are located, or a good portion at least. Anybody who's been around for a while knows that they're seeing that the Great Lakes, the ice in the Great Lakes has actually been reduced in your lifetime. But you're still seeing along the shore. So what happens if that protected blanket along the shore of some of these larger Great Lakes disappears? Well, so lastly, the kind of the theme of the talk is changing climate, we talked about, and changing coasts. So as the climate changes, so do the coasts, whether they change in the Arctic or change further down south. I think it's just as important to communicate this at a community level as it is at the highest levels of government. So that's my talk. Thanks.